There's been a lot of talk recently about the pros and cons of electric vehicles. Now, this is one of those areas that's very likely to divide our community, and division is never a good thing. The old standard of united we stand, divided we fall is very much true. Our hobby, classic cars, performance cars, modified cars, bikes, trucks, we're under a certain amount of scrutiny and potential threat if we don't do the right thing. Climate change is happening. We have to accept that and work with that. We can't be part of the problem, otherwise we're just going to get legislated out of existence and we'd be doing the wrong thing. However, classic vehicles do not need to be part of the problem. There's a number of ways around that. We can embrace new fuels, things that have net CO2 output. They've still got problems locally. You'll still have particulates, you'll still have NOx emissions, but the CO2 emissions can be net zero if we use, for instance, pure ethanol. There's a thought. Methanol, synthetic fuels. There's ways of making these things where the production process is net zero as well. And yes, it is expensive. And yes, there's a certain amount of modifying your car needed to run these fuels. But we've been through that before. Remember when we all went to unleaded? People were changing cylinder heads, and we don't need to do anything that drastic on the car. Some cars will need a different fuel tank, many won't. All cars, you need to have the right type of fuel lines. A lot of classic cars like E-types run nylon anyway, which is fine. So how much modification you've got to do to run on these new fuels does depend on the individual vehicle. For some people it's going to be a big job, for others not so much. That way we can be net zero now. And that means we're ahead of the game, because even a battery electric vehicle is getting its fuel, its energy from the grid, and currently the grid is partly powered by gas power stations. Tiny bit of coal. We're about 30% gas on average in this country. So on average, the grid works out at about 220, 250 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour you take out of it. For whatever you do, whether you're cooking with it, heating your home, or running your electric car. If we run our classic cars on a net zero fuel, like pure ethanol made in a net zero factory, then we're at zero CO2 and we're beating the electric cars. But we can't be complacent, because electric cars are going to get better and better and better, and the technology we've got with them now won't be the technology we have in the future. And it's not far off either. We look at the way lithium cells are going to give way to potentially sodium or aluminium. There's some very, very exciting technology developments in battery electric vehicles that are going to make them much more usable. And the way that they take power out of the grid's changing as well. If you make power walls, big battery cells on the side of a building, quite common, then you actually make the grid have a capacity, so it can use more renewable energy. So when the wind's blowing hard, you're charging up loads of batteries all around the country. When it's not blowing up, you're taking that energy back out again. So over time, and it will take a lot of time, the grid will become more resilient and battery electric vehicles will make more and more sense. I'll talk about hydrogen in another video, but with that in mind, we've got an opportunity now with the classic cars to convert them to fuels that are net CO2 and get ahead of the game. That way, as the competition from battery electric vehicles and the such like becomes more and more intense, we're already on the right side of the argument. If we stay on the wrong side of the argument, if you keep arguing there should be a dispensation to allow me to burn fossil fuels, you'll be on the wrong side of the argument. If our whole industry, our whole hobby, decides that we want a dispensation to burn fossil fuels, then our whole hobby, all the classic cars, are on the wrong side of the argument. And you know what will happen? There'll be legislation, we won't be able to use them. So we don't want that to happen, do we? So think ahead. Think about adapting to change, making the most of it, getting ahead of the game. Our cars can be brilliant.